Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Epic Comic Book Wednesday. This is a world's finest collaboration between Michael K. Vaughan and myself, where we combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comic books on which we've wasted our youths. And since I horned my way in on the whole phenomenon, it's Mike who gets to do the picking of what we talk about each week, which can lay me open to some terrible, terrible choices on his part. But not this time. Not this time. No, he went right away this week for a classic in superhero comic books, which touches on something that we have talked about before, the idea of a run. It's one of the earliest examples of the idea of a run, and that is where you have a writer and an artist who take an old thing, whatever it is, a title, a team, a superhero, an individual concept, or whatnot, and make it something special for a little while. So that you can look at that thing as it existed before that run and think, it was good, but it wasn't this. And you look at it after that run and you think, it's not the same. It's not anywhere near as good. And the run, the particular creative period that we're picking this week is Gardner Fox, the science fiction writer Gardner Fox, and the artist Joe Kubert, teaming up on Hawkman, on DC's Hawkman. The run was in the old Brave and Bold before Batman took it over as a team book. Not to be confused with Hawkman's own book, which had art by Murray Anderson. This instead is Joe Kubert, who takes on the original cover, the original costume design of the character Hawkman, and then enhances it. He changes it slightly. He changes the wings so that they don't seem quite so amorphous anymore. They seem more bird-like. And he gives bird-like tufts, or ear-like tufts, to the head mask of Hawkman and Hawkgirl. And it works tremendously. That redesign works. But even before he does that, this is amazing. It is absolutely amazing. Hawkman was an old character by this point. Gardner Fox created the character and then updated him when DC Comics was updating so many of their characters. They had updated the Flash from the 1940s version that had a winged tin hat on his head to a policeman who gets super speed. They updated Green Lantern from the old, magnificently caped figure of the 1940s to a test pilot who wears an extremely revealing black and green leotard, one piece. And in The Flash and in Green Lantern, the updates were also made a change from the hokiness of the 1940s origin story to science fiction. Science fiction was all the rage. It was growing in popularity, and unbeknownst to Gardner Fox or Julie Schwartz or Mort Weisinger or anybody, it was only going to grow in popularity. It was just going to keep growing in popularity. So the Flash's origin got more of a science fiction-y type thing to it. Green Lantern became an entirely science fiction character, as opposed to the original Green Lantern in the 1940s, who was not. And Hawkman was reimagined as a science fiction character. The original Hawkman and Hawkgirl were reincarnations of ancient Egyptian noblemen, nobility, that had been unjustly slain, and their ghosts were brought forward, their spirits or souls, whatever you want to call it, were put into bodies in the 20th century in order to fight crime, wearing giant hawk costumes. And I think probably the idea originally was, well, we like the iconography of a guy wearing wings and a hawk mask. And what does that remind you of? Well, it reminds you of the ancient Egyptians, whose gods had animal heads. Probably their priests wore animal heads as well. So we'll do that. We'll make him some sort of reincarnated ancient Egyptian priest. That was just chucked out the window for the new Hawkman, who is instead a policeman, much like the Flash. He's a cop, and he's an alien. He's from the planet Thanagar. Thanagarians look exactly like humans. They don't actually have wings. The wings are a costume. In this new Hawkman's complicated backstory, Thanagarians have managed to harness something called the nth metal, that imparts anti-gravity properties and also a few other things. And if you wear nth metal and your wings are treated with it, you can fly. You can mentally control it so that you can fly. And Hawkman and Hawkgirl come to Earth in a spaceship. They don't fly from Thanagar. They come in a spaceship. They park their spaceship in orbit, and they assume civilian identities on Earth as museum curator and his girlfriend. And they fight the crime that crops up on Earth. Hawkman had a modest rogues gallery using ancient weapons, nets and flails and maces and crossbows. For no discernible reason other than that Gardner Fox liked the gimmick of it. Other than that, there's no discernible reason. Hawkman and Hawkgirl in their spaceship up in orbit certainly have particle weapons. They would be a lot more effective against anything they deal with than would a net or a wooden stake or whatever the things they use are. And yet they don't ever use that. They don't ever act like science fiction creatures. And you're going to be able to guess right away my main problem with Hawkman. This new Hawkman. We won't talk about the original Hawkman, or we won't. There's no way that I could talk about the attempts that have been made in DC continuity after the great Joe Kubert run on the character to mesh those two origin stories, to make them the same origin story somehow. The word torturous doesn't begin to describe the continuity backstory of this character. It needs to be just wiped clean. That's all. It just needs to be wiped clean. I would argue if I were put in complete control of this character, the Hawkman and Hawkwoman have a certain kind of visual iconography, so I definitely want to keep them. But I would wipe both origin stories. The ancient Egyptian one is unbelievably cumbersome. What is the point of it? What is the point of hauling all of that in? And if you stick to that origin story becomes far more interesting than a guy wearing a hawk costume to fight crime. You'd rather have stories about that, their origin story, than you would about Hawkman. And the same thing with alien police people, alien cops. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work at all. There is no possible, conceivable reason why a pair of alien cops would act the way that Hawkman and Hawkwoman do. So I'd get rid of both. Just come up with another origin story for Hawkman. I would get rid of both. Maybe you could have some sort of connection between the ancient world and the modern world. That seems to be a thread, that a gimmick that Hawkman fans tend to like. The 10 of them that exist in the world, they tend to like that. Maybe it could be that Hawkman and Hawkgirl, Carter Hall and Shayera Hall are museum curators. And maybe in a new dig or buried inside a new artifact that comes to the museum, they do find something called nth metal that allows them to create costumes that allow them to fly. That would explain their using antique weapons because they like it, because it's their profession. And you wouldn't have any of the alien business, and you wouldn't have any of the reincarnation business. You would just have them doing that. I would do something like that if I were in control, but of course I'm not. And you know, for these Gardner Fox issues, it really doesn't matter. They're just so good that it really doesn't matter. But you're going to be able to guess my main problem with this character, which is that he doesn't have superpowers. And I'm not all that interested in superheroes that don't have superpowers. Sure, he can fly, but that's because he's wearing a harness with manipulable wings that's powered by nth metal. If you take that harness off, in other words, if he steps out of the shower in the morning, he might be an alien. This Hawkman and Hawkgirl are aliens, but they're anatomically identical to humans. They don't have super strength. They're not invulnerable. We're told a couple of times, not so much in these issues, mainly in the Murray Anderson issues later, we're told that their skin has been conditioned in one way or another by Thanagarian science so they can survive in near vacuum conditions for a few minutes at a time. Something totally unimpressive like that. But otherwise, no, they don't. There's a feint in the direction of Hawkman being kind of like a bird version of Aquaman, where he can communicate with birds. there's a feint in that direction. It's always half-hearted. It's never convincing, and it's dropped pretty quickly. If I remember correctly, it's dropped pretty quickly. So, and that's it. That's if you drop that and you take him out of his costume, he's just a normal guy. Also, it, so that's a big drawback for me, is that the character is just a guy who's got a gimmick. So if you took the gimmick off him and you put it on somebody else, well, then they'd have the gimmick. Same thing as Green Lantern's ring. If you took the gimmick off Hawkman and put it on somebody else, they'd have the gimmick, and he'd just be watching. And that, to me, is not all that compelling. It would be a little bit better if Hawkman ever acted or thought like a cop, either human or alien, but he doesn't. Certainly, he and Hawkgirl never act like aliens. Never. In these issues, they never do. That would be interesting. In a way, that would be interesting, especially for a little while, I believe, during the Gardner Fox era, they were stranded on Earth. They were here involuntarily. That would make it more interesting. Certainly, that would make it more interesting, but none of that happens. Instead, we just get Joe Kubert, a great comic book artist, doing a superhero comic, which he very seldom did. And it's just wonderful. The clean, sharp precision of his work is just wonderful all throughout here. I have electronic versions of these issues. I do not believe that there is a Hawkman omnibus that contains all the Murray Anderson issues and all of the Joe Kubert issues. I don't think that such a thing exists. I think this is yet another example of DC just being asleep at the wheel in terms of their most marketable reprint products. I think once upon a time there was a hardcover in the old archive edition of Joe Kubert's run on Hawkman. I'm pretty sure that I had that at one point, but I tore the place upside down and could not find it. And there certainly isn't a Michael K. Vaughan style gigantic omnibus. I don't think there is. I haven't watched his video yet, but if I watch that video and he holds up such a thing, I'll be amazed. And I have no idea what the current state of Hawkman continuity is. None whatsoever. When the idea was pitched by the writer, hey, I think I can make one whole origin story for Hawkman that encompasses both ancient Egypt and the planet Thanagar. When that writer went to his editor and said that, the editor should have said, no, no thanks. Don't do that. This is a nightmare. It took, I think it was 4-issue miniseries just to lay out the groundwork. I defy you to read that miniseries to the end and understand the story that writer came up with. And certainly it's not thumbnail. It's got to be thumbnail in order for readers to understand it. And it wasn't. Instead, it was unbelievably convoluted. So you get the visual iconography here. A guy with great big wings and a mace. That's the visual iconography of Hawkman, and it's pretty good. As superhero iconography goes, it's pretty good. And of course, Hawkgirl got a second bite at the apple, big time, because when the producers of the Justice League animated show were putting together their cast of characters, well, they wanted aliens, sure, they're going to have a lot of aliens in the cast. The producer said, we didn't just want 7 white guys saving the world every week. And I can see the point in that. And they made some great decisions. Instead of Hal Jordan's Green Lantern, they gave us Jon Stewart's Green Lantern, a black man, an ex-service person, who was perfectly done in that show. And instead of giving us Hawkman and Hawkgirl, they gave us just Hawkgirl. And did a wonderful job. The Hawkgirl in the original run of that cartoon is 10 times more interesting than any other version of this character on or off the screen in any kind of comic book. I'm assuming, I don't know, and I'm not going to bother to check, I'm assuming that if Hawkgirl exists in DC continuity now, she is of course lesbian. Which I don't know what that would do with her relationship with her husband, Katar Hall. I don't know what that would do. I assume that relationship is over. I don't think DC at the moment has any female superheroes who are not lesbian. So I wouldn't bother to check because it wouldn't make any sense anyway. Even once I got past the fact that she was, putting up with her male husband, I would still have to figure out what version of this character's origin story they're using, and I don't want to. I don't want to at all. It's this has a greater cleanliness to it. It's just the Joe Kubert artwork. You can pretty much not read the issues. I don't think I have ever read the words of an issue of Brave and Bold. I think I've only just looked at the pictures, and they're wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So this was a good pick. This was the Joe Kubert run on Hawkman is one of those archetypal things that comic book fans always point at and say, we're looking at both companies, Marvel and DC, and we're looking at the really good stuff, and this is one of those things. That it's one they always point to, which makes it all the stranger that DC Comics has not hyped the heck out of this. There should be all kinds of reprint options. There should be a doorstop hardcover omnibus. To watch Hawkman caliper and caltrops his way to victory instead of I don't know. There's a long tradition in both companies, both Marvel and DC, of extraterrestrial lawmen, extraterrestrial cops coming to Earth for one reason or another. One of the founding members of the Justice League is an extraterrestrial cop who comes to Earth. I never understood that. I find it far more refreshing that Superman is an extraterrestrial, Wonder Woman is not human, and of course the other member of that trinity is Batman, and none of them are traditional law enforcement. I think that's. I remember when this run on Hawkman was running originally. I remember thinking, this is a little weird and more than a little culturally tone deaf that you're making so many of these heroes into cops. I don't know if you've looked at the news lately, but cops are not all that popular. I guess maybe it was just that the creators were out of touch and were thinking of the popularity of cop shows on TV. But this Hawkman is gone anyway. He lives only in these issues. And what a choice. What a pick they are. And we've got a couple more weeks to go of Epic Comic Book Wednesday, after which point I'm wondering if Michael K. Vaughan will revive the tradition of us reading Western comics for June on the Range. I don't know if that'll happen. We shall see. But that's it for today. A genuine classic from the DC backlogs. The Gardner Fox, Joe Kubert, Hawkman. Wonderful pick. Wonderful to look at these things again. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I will see you next week. Thank you, BookTube.